Are we live?
Yes, we're live.
Okay. So hello, welcome to our panel. We are privileged to have today two panelists, Colin, Ware and Mukund Umalkar, who are experts in the field of RegTech. So we're going to talk about how organizations can basically integrate RegTech in their digital strategies. Colin, could you please introduce yourself, and then Mukund, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Francis. Hi, everyone. My name's Colin Ware. I work at BNY Mellon within our asset servicing division. I'm a senior regulatory product manager within a team called Regulatory Business Solutions. So very much as it says, really, we are here to help our clients with regulations. My role very much is to look at how we can find new solutions, new services that will help our client base with their regulatory obligations. Obviously, ourselves as BNY Mellon have an awful lot of regulations that also we need to comply with, but very much my focus is to look at how we can help clients externally as well. My background previously to BNY Mellon, I've been at many different companies across financial services, mainly, in fact, rather than the custodian side, in the investment banking background. But slowly but surely, and I guess same as everyone else since the big crash in 2008, have become more and more involved in regulations, both from a solution point of view, but also looking at the challenges around data as well. So that's me.
Thank you, Colin. Mukund, who are you?
Thanks, Francis. Thanks, Colin. First of all, really, thank you for having me here. My name is Mukund Umalkar. I am part of ING. I'm part of a specialist function within ING called ING Neo, actually. And within ING Neo, we have 5 value spaces, one of which is safe and compliant. So very much, around risk management and compliance. And our safe and compliant it is an area where we at ING feel that we can create significant value for.
Oh, Colin is frozen.
Yeah, I think he had some challenges earlier as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you hear me still?
Yes. Continue.
There was a bit of a drop in my network. So yeah, so I'm part of a specialist team that is responsible for partnerships with FinTech and RegTech firms. Obviously, a lot of solutions that are being created, and a lot of them are by sort of young, fast-emerging, tech-led, AI-led companies. And really, my role is looking at how can we effectively partner with these companies, not just for the sake of ING, but also for the sake of our customers. And yeah, I've been working in the RegTech space now for the past 5 or 6 years, and prior to that, many years in driving digital transformation initiatives. So I'm really excited to explore this topic a bit more with Colin and yourself, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mukund. Thank you, Colin, for introducing yourselves. I'm just moderating this panel among the 2 experts. My name is Francis Gross. I work at the European Central Bank. They're a senior advisor in the Directorate General Statistics. My background is engineering. I worked in the automotive industry for 16 years doing globalization, so discovering their supply chains, global supply chains, and global data networks, which led to my shock when coming to finance. Meanwhile, technology has been running away for the last 20-30 years. I have lived through the shock of 2008 at the ECB, where I realized that we were, all of us, very incapable of knowing what was going on at the speed we would have needed to know. So why are we talking RegTech today? We're talking RegTech because, well, technology and regulation are actually experiencing what Azeem Azhar calls an exponential gap. Technology goes away exponentially, regulation has a problem running behind, and especially measurement, which is all about, say, reporting. Yeah. So the big frame is that we cannot measure without technology anymore. So the old style reporting, the templates will die. We need to measure globally because the smallest relevant system for stability is the world. we will need to measure real time because shocks can propagate instantly in that very tightly coupled system. That will not work through reporting because you can't compress the reporting supply chain to real time, essentially. I've developed a whole lot of ideas around this. No time to express them right now in my intro, but the interest of this panel is to basically close the gap between our operational bases we have both in the private banks and in the public sector institutions, and the communication between those institutions in terms of exchanging data, having access to data, even better, having access to the data we need to have to know what's going on. That's ultimately what it's all about. So businesses are trying to come to grips with their big zoos of systems and machines that have come up bottom up, basically, each business line looking at its own profitability, efficiency, and so on. And that zoo needs now to be basically integrated a bit better to make the institutions more efficient and also to allow the institutions to be in control of their own business. And at the same time, on the regulatory level, we need to be able to integrate what's happening at many, many institutions across the system, meaning worldwide. So there is a long way to go, but the only starting point we can take is to address regulatory requirements through technology, hence RegTech. And we're still at the beginning of it, although we've been in it for 10 years. So we will need to look at the more strategic aspects and the more practical aspects, and we'll try to cover that in the panel. Sorry for being a bit muddled, but I try to do my best here. Colin.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah, Colin. So Colin, please, how do you see the subject?
Yeah, so yeah, thanks, Francis. And it's a good introduction. You're probably right. It's sometimes very difficult to kind of put the challenge and the issues into one neat box, if you like. And muddled is probably quite a good way of describing the challenges that we face. And I suppose if I look about, the whole landscape in general around RegTech, and how RegTech can help us, it's certainly the challenge, I think, is twofold. It's one, how do we get the best solutions and how do we work together as a market and an industry? That's always been a very difficult challenge around it, because I think we're all tasked with very much the same kind of challenges around how do we best meet regulatory requirements, how do we best ensure that we can demonstrate compliance with regulations. It's very much, as time has gone on, has become a much wider issue now. So it's not just the the major financial players, the GSIFIs, those type of organisations that are really carrying the regulatory burden, for want of a better word. It's now very much more, lots of the regulations now are beginning to look much more into providing greater transparency. So, to talk to your point about measurement, Francis, how do regulators, oversee their markets in a much more efficient and, as you said, much more timely fashion as well. So that does create this need for regulatory data and the transparency into those markets to be much more imminent, rather than maybe quarterly reporting. People are beginning to look for daily reporting. They need daily updates. They need daily perspective to understand as a whole, how is that market operating? Is it operating efficiently? Are there any particular concerns or upsets? And I guess the COVID pandemic is probably a great case in point. How do regulators keep on top of everything and ensure that they have got the right level of data to be able to make some judgments and some judgment calls? So and I think obviously what we're seeing now is some of those regulations beginning to evolve as well. So just coming out this week. Obviously, there's quite a few proposals around from the Capital Markets Union directives, obviously, for example, around changes to AIFMD and MiFID and the LTIF regulations as well. So I think that's a constantly evolving landscape is what makes it very difficult, I think, for any company really to keep on top of it. So absolutely, how can we utilize RegTech solutions to help us do that? Is a paramount concern, I think. I don't think any company can really just keep abreast of it, in isolation. They'd be constantly updating, their systems, if you like. They'd be constantly trying to find new ways of modifying. I think without a doubt, we've all got that same challenge of how do we consolidate and how do we provide kind of single platforms. And the challenge around, helping those RegTech companies is really, helping them to integrate with, different financial institutions as well. Because I think in terms of, just the way that regulations have grown up, everyone's kind of got, is probably regulated by many different regulators, depending on how big you are as a company. What is your global presence, for example? So it's understanding, which regulatory, jurisdictions you're under, if you like. But then also understanding, maybe how can some of those regulations be a little bit more consolidated, a bit more unified? How can you find the right data sets that will allow, a solution and a RegTech provider to almost, be able to help you with those issues? So I think those, to me, are probably what we're all faced with in terms of the market is how can we, possibly work together better? How can we enable RegTech companies to get their solutions to help us as well? And then, how can we, as a market in general, direct each other and provide the right level of, input without becoming too focused just on ourselves and just on our silos, which obviously in terms of regulation, everyone needs to comply. Everyone, has got that in the back of their minds anyway. So it does kind of temper some of the innovative and some of the other, maybe kind of solutions that might be longer term thinking, because quite often it's short term thinking, because we need to comply with a deadline. We need to make sure that we are not breaching that particular regulation, and that kind of almost that determines your strategy, rather than maybe being able to be a bit more innovative around it. But obviously something that ING with Mukund are working on, I think is a great step forward as well, and a fantastic way of beginning to sort of tackle some of those issues.
Thank you very much, Colin. That's a very exciting overview. I think you open more avenues than we will be able to explore fully in this panel. Also because Mukund has not spoken yet. So Mukund, what do you have to say on this?
Yeah, thanks, Francis and Colin. I think I tend to agree with a lot of what you said. For me, before we talk about reporting or before we talk about RegTech solutions, etc., I think it's really key, important to take a step back and really kind of put some kind of a framing around it. It's such a broad topic. As you say, it's very hard to cover a lot of the topics that even Colin raised today already. But maybe I'll start with sort of three things, right? So the first one is very easy to agree with, is that regulation really matters, right? Like, it affects everyone. It affects customers, it affects employees, shareholders, all of us. And especially in the last sort of 2 years or so, with the pandemic, everyone has really amplified their reliance on digital services. And so, it is something that regulation is a great tool for all of us to ensure that our societal fabric really evolves with our values, right? Like that's kind of how I think about it. So that's the first thing, is regulation really matters. I think the second aspect is really around regulation is a shared space, is a shared challenge. It's a shared task that we all are really working on, often, to Colin's point, in our silos. And so, post 2008, post the financial crisis, the complexity has really increased in this space. And therefore, it is very important for us as an industry within financial services, but also beyond financial services, to really come together. This includes FinTech and RegTech firms, large corporates, including financial institutions, regulators, venture capitalists, advocacy, advisory firms, to really come together, but do it in a practical way to solve some of this complexity together, right? So that's around, the second point is really around that sort of shared challenge and collaboration. And the third aspect is really around, traditionally, this area has been looked at as something which is more of a cost burden, right? And I think there is an element of that. It will always be there. But I think forward-thinking firms now are really starting to look at this as a real opportunity. Real opportunity to serve customers better, to really differentiate themselves, to do the right thing for our stakeholders, right, and really drive positive, business and societal outcomes. So for me, I think that's sort of how I really think about this space, because it's so broad and it's so wide-ranging. It touches, especially in financial services, it touches the core of everything that we do, but also now the implications across different industries are huge, right? Like in healthcare or in aviation. You take any industry, Googles and Facebooks of the world kind of struggle with this as well. So it's not just about throwing more technology at it, but really understanding, customer behavior, really understanding, what our obligations are, and so on. So again, let's explore this further. So yeah, I think for me, as an industry, I think it's really important for us to engage with this in the right way, to build together, to enable, to adopt, to contribute, and to really reach out beyond the realms of our organization and really look at, how can we drive this opportunity forward. So yeah, that's really how I think about this space, and there is a lot to it, but let's explore some of it together today.
Oh, thank you. So now I have a job here. But let's see the big topics I see here. We all face a shared challenge, and we all swim in the same system together, but we compete and we act within our silos. Why? Because that's where we have the budgets, that's where we have the resources. But acting in the silos won't solve the problem. So I understand that we will need to, in this panel, the discussion will be more profound, not about the technical, practical details. So we need to look at the big challenges. The first one is to overcome silos, to overcome competition, to work together. Now here we have two big challenges. The one is how can we generate the will to do it, the wisdom to do it? And the other is how do we start it? So the will to cooperate and the ways to cooperate, to start cooperating more. Well, perhaps, Colin, could you get started on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with Mukund's point there earlier, actually, just about how actually regulation has become a bit of a differentiator, and how you can help your clients with regulation is definitely becoming much more of a highlighted topic. Certainly in my experience is that the more that you can provide some consolidated solutions, the more that you can provide services across regulations, the better position you're in. And and that's probably I would say it's been a game changer maybe over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. And I agree with again, maybe that's something that the pandemic has highlighted in terms of our digital strategies and becoming more and more digitized as well, is that that's kind of accelerated this need now, I think, for people to to become more automated around this whole process of how we can report on regulations and reflect on regulations. But I think in terms of how we can work together, It does come back right to the beginning. To be honest, I think it's how regulations are actually drafted and written and implemented. We are all faced with that challenge of, as I said before, in terms of the fact that we've got many different regulators depending on which jurisdictions you're either hosted or you're registered or your head office or you're headquartered. But of course, there could be many other satellite offices as well that will come under different jurisdictions. And I think currently, if we're talking about how we can help RegTech solutions as well, the fact that the regulations are just not written in particularly compatible formats for machine readable text is definitely hampering any kind of overall how do we help the market in general will definitely be hampered by that, because it's very difficult to apply some of the digital tools like AI and machine learning that could help in terms of understanding across regulations what are the same data sets, what are the same components, what are the same requirements of those reporting. It's still very difficult then to actually pull in a system or a solution that can read everything. That's currently a massive challenge. So I think that to me would be almost like the number one point. I think, Francis, you touched on it as well in terms of this is now a global issue, if you like, and things like ESG will definitely keep us all on our toes and test us even more, because ESG absolutely will be how can we possibly measure whether people are complying with those particular requirements around around the ESG, and then as some of those regulations come down the line, which is bound to happen as well. How do we get consistency? How do we ensure data quality? So I think that's going to be very important, and it's I'm not saying it's kind of utopia vision, if you like, but I think can we get regulators to work together more? There are definitely pockets of some good practice that are going on. There are definitely some regulators that are trying to work in terms of how can we establish a much better digital strategy and agenda around regulations, and how can we enable people better. But I think currently that's we're very much at the start of a journey around that, and I think the only way of kind of getting everyone to maybe work together better and reduce our costs, because obviously that's a huge burden on everyone, is to maybe bring those regulations into a much more easily digestible format, is probably the best way to put it. So that's probably my first point. You're gonna come back on that one, Francis.
Yeah, well, I just want to highlight one word you said. It's automation. In the context of getting the regulators to work together, I mean, what we see, we have a technical challenge. And we look at, say, the regulators. I'm on the regulatory side. I know how the colleagues work. And they will want to do good. But same as others, we have small brains. And we have narrow mandates. We try to stick to them without annoying industry too much. So the problem is that Bank of England annoys industry in the English way, Banque de France annoys the same banks, the French way, and so on. So automation, for it to work, needs to work on a global scale, if you want it to. So we look at what we want to have, the regulators. We don't really look at where it comes from. We say, okay, that's a reporting agent's problem. So continuing on this line, would you think that for the regulators to work together, a good topic could be to see how can we make this system more measurable?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Francis, absolutely. I think because that is ultimately that is what the regulations are usually are trying to do, isn't it? Is to measure the market, measure what is happening in particular particular instruments, particularly maybe focus on their own jurisdictions. So Yeah, I think something that can help us to measure, but also measure in a more consistent format. So, you know, if you're looking across, you know, how can you possibly, as you said, markets are now much more global anyway.
Francis.
Okay, Mukund, are you still here? I'm afraid we lost Mukund.
We may well have done.
Continue, Colin. Continue.
I'll continue. I'm sure he'll come back. He's obviously having a few problems. So yeah, without a doubt, how do we, you know, measuring consistently has got to be, you know, a huge way forward. But it's also, you know, how do we, because markets are becoming much more global now, companies are very much more global as well in terms of their, you know, their impacts and their the different markets that they're, you know, trading in and investing in. It must be eventually a way of getting some kind of a global, you know, global regulatory body, and I'm sure, Francis, that's something that you've talked about and thought about over many years as well. You know, to allow that centralized collection of the data as well, because still, you know, even though the data is now being collected, it's only in, you know, okay, Europe or the US or Asia Pac, you know, in different countries as well. So, you know, how do you get that overall vision as well, which I'm sure is, you know, something that you've thought about for many years.
Music to my ears, Colin. You used one word, you said utopian at some point. I think we must dare to think broader, because we are addicted. That's my perception in this whole financial system, both on regulatory and the industry side. We are addicted to thinking small. We think in small silos. We think within narrow mandates, even if those mandates are obsolete for the measurement part, for instance. That's my personal opinion. So we need to think big. We need to think the whole system, because, as you said, measuring the entire system, having the data come from one source. Well, if you look at good data management, one object, one representation, and all who use that representation of that object should use that same representation of it. It's a simple, moronic, basic thing. But when we come to thinking of the big system, we forget it. So, Mukund, in terms of the practical implementations, I mean, not implementations immediately today, but where to go in order to have that comprehensive access to data, that all the regulations ask questions that are written in the same technical language. Would you see broad avenues? Things where to go and how to start?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a fascinating discussion. By the way, can I just check if you can hear me? Okay, sorry, I've been having some network problems.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear
you. I love your framing of, you know, think big. If I can extend it by adding two small words to it, which is, you know, think big, but start small. I'm a big believer in that philosophy. You know, often I feel that we really need to figure out ways to drive this conversation forward. And I've been into multiple situations where we have 20 institutions around the table, but, you know, we can't really get anything done, right? So I think for me, it's really about having that big picture in mind, but also having practical ways to really look at, you know, how can we collaborate? So some of the topics we were talking about earlier around silos, right? For me, it's always a top down and a bottom up kind of, you know, you can analyze it in any way, in both ways rather. So, you know, if you really break down RegTech, right, there's lots of different areas, reporting being one of them, but, you know, understanding obligations or, you know, the whole customer lifecycle management. And I think there we can really look at, you know, what is the low-hanging fruit. So, for example, you know, understanding obligations, which is the other side of writing obligations, I suppose. But for us, as institutions, you know, understanding obligations is one of the important areas within that sort of domain, and there we can really help each other, right? That's where we can really collaborate. Whereas if you take areas, say, such as KYC processes, there, you know, there is a bit harder to collaborate in that space. So I think for me, really, another sort of practical way to look at, you know, break down sort of a seemingly bigger area and into smaller chunks to look at, you know, which areas really make sense to collaborate. Reporting is another area where there has been some collaboration, around the machine readable aspects as well.
I'm afraid Mukund is frozen out again.
He's having some big challenges.
Shame.
He's having regulatory challenges of his own by the looks of it.
Yeah. Okay, Mukund, you're back.
My network has been working perfectly fine for the last months, and today and this time is the perfect time for it to keep going down. So I apologize again. But yeah, I think ultimately we have to break down some of these bigger areas into smaller ones, right? But also, beyond the areas such as machine readable, there's lots of other ways we can collaborate. For example, a lot of technologies use AI or natural language processing, and as an industry, we're still understanding, how some of these work, right? So that's where we can share a lot of the knowledge with regulators, with our peers, with firms to really help each other and drive that conversation forward. Explainability has been a big area as well, and so how can we really look at explainability and try and develop frameworks where we start to talk about some common languages. So for me, I think I really bring it back to your point about think big, but start small, and then really build on the successes. And for me, that's really the way to go in RegTech.
Well, what you say resonates very strongly with me. So think big is the first job we have to do, and that needs to be done concrete. So just give you an idea, the way I have come to see the economy, it's a bit like this paradigm change. So the story we tell about the world. Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolution, a great book to read. I've come to see the global economic system as a network of contracts that connects a global population of parties. Once you are there, you don't want to go back. Why? As an engineer mathematician, I say, well, that's a graph. How do we measure what's happening in that graph? Well, we identify every edge, every node, and we attach the data to that. Now, there is one word that you did not yet use in the starting small, standardization. So represent every edge, every node in that network of contracts as in a standardized fashion, and so that everyone can have access to that one representation of things, put it into a public infrastructure. Okay, access can be regulated. But that's a start. And from there, it will become much, much easier to write regulations in a way that will be better usable, to cooperate on development of standards, for instance, design of algorithms to represent contracts, that kind of things. I quite like some of the Yogi Berra quotes. I mean, he once said, if you don't know where you're going, you get somewhere else. That's for an individual, but we are a herd of cats. So if the herd doesn't know where we're going, every cat will go somewhere else. But if we want to automate and standardize, we need to give the cats a kind of beacon towards which to go. And that is that vision we need to develop. Vision not in the sense futuristic stuff. No, it's how we see the world today. And once we share that vision, many actions become easier. For instance, when you say understanding obligations, well, we have obligations coming from many regulations. So the first understanding is, are these compatible? And to feed back to the regulators, guys, you could do a technically better job coming to the same result you want. Align your timings for reporting, for instance, align the definitions and so on. Now, do you see say ways to progress down that route? So basically, I can see two broadly. One would be to have dialogue through think tanks, whatever. Another one is also through firms specializing in RegTech who could play a role in that. I don't know who would like to start.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to come back actually, Francis, just when we were talking about collaboration and everything else, and I think we've all been involved in various different initiatives, that have tried to pull together regulators and financial services companies and RegTech providers and everything else. And Yeah, and I think Mukund, you kind of summed it up quite well. They kind of just became talking shops without any real action around it. So yeah, I am, you know, definitely keen to understand how we could pull everyone back together. I think in certain areas, I mean, you know, certainly, you know, I think the regulators are maybe a little bit more amenable to feedback, but again, it does seem to be only, you know, in kind of pockets of experience and expertise around that. So I think possibly you're right in terms of what could could maybe drive it is actually getting the RegTech companies themselves, and maybe that was a question I was going to kind of pose back to Mukund as well. Is you know, do we think not that there's too many solutions out there, but maybe there are too many, you know, there are lots of different solutions and a lot of different service providers. You know, everyone's trying to make some sense of you know, how to progress. But is there maybe some kind of you know, options around it that, you know, that maybe, I don't know, there could be a specialist in horizon scanning that could maybe partner with someone that was specialist in reporting, pull together a solution between them, and then, you know, from that maybe drive sort of economies of scale, drive better innovation, that type of thing as well. So it's a thorny subject as to how we really progress it. And you know, I've been around long enough to remember plenty of initiatives around, you know, utilities and great, you know, grand sort of market schemes that really didn't go anywhere. So I'd love to, you know, to have a thought, and then to also be involved in something that eventually is actually going to make a difference, because I think that's part of our problem is and you probably touched on it as well, Francis, as well, is that we've all got limited budgets, we've all got limited resources, we're all kind of, you know what, I'd love to be able to do something different, but I just can't you know, I can't see myself out of just tackling this issue now. So yeah, it'd be good to get views as well as to how we think that could progress. I wish I had the answer around it, but you know, it's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Well, I would just like to react quickly before coming back to you, Mukund. What you pictured is, well, we have a world of diversity that's mushrooming. Many solutions coming to market, many smaller firms offering RegTech services. And of course, that diversity is not standardized. So you have a lot of little silos creating a flurry of them. And the other aspect is that it's all happening at the level of your budget, your responsibility, your silo, because, well, that's where you live. And my point on that is that, well, you can have convergence. Say, for instance, those of us who are married, we usually have a very quick convergence on the opinion of the ladies. But when you have many elements who are in a very dynamic process, it's very, very rare that they converge on one thing, or then they will converge very slowly. So the question would be how to create faster convergence. And that's perhaps the point I wanted to allude to before. Those things that we need, on which we need to cooperate, on which we need to have the same solution, say, for instance, LEI. On those, regulators might have a job to help industry to agree on a single solution. Designs will always come from the market, but at some point there is more value in all doing it the same way than in looking through another 1,000 designs to see whether one is marginally better. So Mukund, you pick it up where you want.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's a fascinating you know, discussion. I think that firstly, you know, if you look at where a lot of the financial institutions are, right? So it's ultimately will be a journey for everybody, you know. So let me give one example. So we talked about obligations, right? And we talked about how can we, you know, drive standardization across the industry. right? If we think of an institution as an industry itself, right, where you have different functions, you have retail, you have institutional banking, you have folks looking at line 1 and line 2, you have someone responsible for market credit risk, someone responsible for non-financial risk, for example. And if you think about these different constituents, something that helps identify obligations is ultimately relevant for every single team or function that I just mentioned. And so in that sense, again, if we come back to this principle of think big and start small, maybe credit risk looks at something like this, of using an AI solution to identify their obligations. But then suddenly, if we socialize that across different teams within ING that want to and could use a solution like this, then suddenly we uplift the capability that we had and really bring it to the next level, right? So I think if we then really play this out, the industry can sort of take this kind of an approach where if an institution is trying something out where there's some really meaningful learnings that are worth sharing, especially in non-competitive spaces, then we can really learn much quicker and really accelerate our path. So that still doesn't drive necessarily standardization, but I think already, considering that we still are really, throwing lots of humans at complex problems, I think that already uplifts our capability. And then it really allows us to have much more meaningful discussion around standardization, because then we really, touch and feel and understand, the solutions and its constraints and its capabilities. And I think there's not enough of that happening across the industry. So for me, I think that is really key. And again, to bring our conversation back a little bit to sort of RegTech and how do we really embed this, I think ultimately we need champions, within, like in ING, part of my role is to really connect and engage with those champions, but, we need to really identify those champions across the industry. I think we need to do a lot of education and awareness of what is possible and, where some constraints are. And every institution, for example, has an opportunity to really help shape, how the solution should look like, what the standards and frameworks should look like. And I think we also need, especially when it comes to the RegTech firms, we need really the right engagement model. I talk about this a lot within our organization, which is that, we are much better at working with the IBMs and Microsofts of the world, right? Whereas, if you really look at the RegTech firms, a lot of them are, startups and scale-ups and, really building solutions that a lot of financial institutions need yesterday, but we still don't quite understand how to effectively work with them, right? It's a smaller, fast-growing organization, very different from a large financial institution. And how do we work together? What is the right model of engagement? What are the roles of different supporting functions like security, information risk, compliance, or legal or procurement when engaging with these companies? I think having that right engagement model is really, really key. And then we can enable the champions, within our organizations, but across the industry as well. And I think one of my visions is really to have almost like an industry center of excellence where, these kind of champions can really come together, and work alongside regulators, alongside RegTech and FinTech firms, and really try and build that knowledge base for the industry, which is really lacking today. So I think these are, for me, some of the practical ways of really driving this conversation forward, right? And I think if you think about, in the sort of non-digital era, like, traditionally the way we've done is we've had trade associations and, people coming together. Whereas I think we need to sort of apply that construct, but much more in a digital kind of sense, and really make conversations data-driven. So I think there's, again, a huge opportunity in this space. And I think especially financial services industry has a role to play to educate other players as well. So we again can build on this. And so you think big, start small, but then as soon as you have some of these outcomes and insights to share, it's much easier then to bring people, because everyone is really interested to learn more about in this space.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating, because it gets very practical now. Sorry, I have echo here. Yeah, so the point, the starting point I hear you say is to move certain areas from the field of competition to the field of cooperation. Now, for that will already require an adjustment to the strategy of certain companies, because some compete on everything. I mean, they clean their data, sell it on the market, add to the problem, and that kind of thing. So that already tells me we need some thinking, some competent thinking on the subject from the top of the companies. You talk about champions. So those champions, to be enabled, they need to be attached directly to, say, CEO, yeah, ideally. And we need those champions to be networked together. But then they will need to produce output of the kind ideas, visions, reports, proposals, to go where? I mean, last year in Davos, there was, or this year was, everyone talked about climate change. Well, climate change is cancer for our civilization. But a digital accident, 2008 to the power of 2030, perhaps, that will be a stroke. So it is a problem of the same kind of magnitude. And then you add in ESG, Colin mentioned that before. That creates a strong connection to the climate change issue. So my take is that what you propose is the right way to go, but we need also to connect it to the top reaches of the organizations. So trade associations you mentioned. I mean, I have been in touch with trade associations. Very good people doing a good job, but they do it in their pre-digital sphere. They don't really touch the digital stuff, because there are people who are busy with the traditional business of the banks. They don't look at the technical stuff under the hood. So I think what I hear you say is we need to raise the profile of the issue. We need to bring the issue to visibility, and we need to put people on it who are capable of thinking, and so thinking wide, thinking broad, thinking ambitious and bold vision. And then we need to connect that to the top.
100%. And I think this is where also, and we haven't mentioned this enough, but regulators have a big role to play, right? And some of the more forward-thinking regulators, in Europe, in the UK, in Asia, we've seen them really take some steps forward to engage. What my challenge back to regulators is that we've had very successful opportunities such as tech sprints and like trying to solve financial crime together and things like that. But I think we have to now really, at least in the part of the world that we are from, we really have to take that conversation forward, and beyond the tech sprints, right? That's kind of my challenge back to the regulators, because you all have huge amounts of power to really bring champions and senior people together and drive action, and I think that's what I hope we will see in the coming near future.
Okay, and here comes my call to all the audience as well. We need to say encourage regulators, because say these tech sprints that took place, for instance, at Bank of England FCA, that was done by a bunch of young people with fairly limited attention from the top. And once a little prototype like this has been done, okay, you use it for advertising the achievement you do, and to be happy, look good, and you come back to business as usual. So I mean, it would be so nice, and I've called for that many times, that the CEOs of the banks, say, and of financial businesses in the financial world, especially also the fintechs who get it, that these guys use all the channels they have to the regulators at the top level, to alert them. And I think the first level of alert could also be a scare. I mean, Colin, how do you see our capabilities evolving if we continue to work the way we work, with technology racing away? I mean, we have 5G coming, networks 1,000 times faster. We have quantum computing coming. AI is progressing at lightning speed. Cloud is progressing. So with all these technologies moving ahead, how do you see the current way we do things with all the local innovation there is, cope with the situation we're going to face, the context we're going to face in 10, 20 years? Do we have a chance?
Probably very, very limited, to be honest with you, Francis. I think if we continue the way we're going, yeah, we will never get ourselves out of this whole spaghetti hoops mess of regulation, if you like, in terms of extricating ourselves. I love the idea actually about the champions idea. That's a really great idea. I agree with you very much as well, Francis, that, you know, some of the major financial players as well, there is a definite role to be played in liaising, you know, at higher levels within regulators as well. I think that could definitely work. You know, there are pockets around that again as well. You know, there'll be teams of advocacy, that type of thing as well. Teams that do try to stay close to regulators and everything else, but I think it's still that, you know, how can we help? And it shapes the wrong word, because a regulator is, you know, of course they are providing the oversight and the governance around the market, but it's how can we, you know, maybe just begin to think about that next generation of regulations that are coming down the pipe. You know, maybe the ones that have already gone before. We've you know, it's a bit late now, but you know, things like the Capital Markets Union within the EU, maybe there's a way there that those can be shaped. ESG, no, we keep coming back to that, but again, you know, how do we think about that differently? I do believe as well is, you know, that maybe the whole regulatory space, if we're being honest, the same thing with data to some extent, was never seen as particularly, you know, a great space for innovative minds to become, people that maybe really want to be, you know, involved in leading technology. Some of the bigger, better brains around it maybe have, you know, I suppose have looked at different, you know, maybe different career paths, different projects. I believe that, you know, both data and then, you know, the wider sort of regulatory burdens around, you know, around that, and how we pull together the right data, get the datas into the right formats, the right repositories as well. That will also help us as well. So, you know, maybe there's a way there in terms of centralizing data repositories as well, because at the end of the day, we are all going to get the same data, very much as Mukund said as well. We're all trying to understand the regulations, trying to interpret them as well. So is there a way that we can collaborate around that? But I think it's probably more, how do we encourage some of the, you know, I'm only looking at myself here in terms of the younger minds, younger brains, people that are coming into financial services industries that are actually, you know, saying actually, you know, I want to get involved in helping, you know, the regulatory challenges and looking at regulatory issues. I want to become a data scientist, for example, that wants to understand how we can better make judgments across the different data requirements for each of the regulations. Can we combine some of those data sets together? Can we look at how the requirements of, you know, a regulation in the US is very similar to one in the EU, for example. So let's pull the data together. You know, all that type of thinking. I think we want to try and encourage and bring in, you know, those digital brains, if you like, that you know, will bring some fresh thinking as well. You know, Francis, myself, and you know, Mukund to a lesser extent. You know, we've probably been around and talking about this for quite a few years now, with you know, in various different ways of obviously helping, you know, our own institutions, trying to help and spread the word around, you know, how can we collaborate more? But maybe there's a way now that we can bring in some different technological kind of brains, and the digital revolution should really help in terms of regulation as well. And how can we get that best talent? How can we get the best talent and the brightest talent to come in and look at that as well? And begin to hothouse those ideas. And that to me would be maybe a way that we can not be looking at this in 20 years time and still talking about the same thing. I doubt whether I'll still be talking about it, but hopefully those are sort of things I think we want to make it much more appealing subject and a much more appealing topic for those brains to get involved with.
Well, probably
Colin,
we will.
If I can,
probably will attract the brighter people if we can tell them that's an exciting adventure. It's not just droning away with bad data and trying to make them a little less bad. But for that, we need to have the, I would say, even the aggression to think outside the box, to break the mold, to refuse sticking with a complacent language we hear all around, and especially from the non-data people. Mukund, I think this will also be
I think
your final words for this panel.
No, absolutely. Look, I think to Colin's point, I fully agree. And I think my sense anyway is that, this area is becoming more and more and more important. It's getting different sort of perspectives from multiple industries. And, after the financial crisis, sadly, some of the events that we've seen unfold, at Google or Facebook have really raised the profile. And, more and more, I think younger and brighter people are looking at this topic. We saw the announcement of the metaverse, and God knows what kinds of regulations will probably need to be applied. It's just completely changing the way the world as we understand it. So I think, again, to go back to my point before, we are going to rely more and more on these digital services, whether it's financial service or any other type of digital service. And so really, I think that regulation is really important tool to, again, really drive and enable how we want our society to evolve, and align that with our values, right? That's kind of the statement I go back to. And I think that's where, again, we all have to work together, but also enable, folks who are from the outside, maybe not necessarily directly working in this space, but have something to contribute to bring them.
Oh.
We need to get some of those brains to work with Mukund's connectivity.
Yeah, let's hope Mukund will be back in a sec.
Do we have any questions from the audience at all, Francis?
I don't think so, but anyway,
Okay.
we don't have time left now. We have 2 minutes to go, and let's just give a few seconds for Mukund to come back. Otherwise, perhaps I'll try to give a very short summary. So we face a mounting challenge. We are not going to, Mukund, you're back, sorry. If you want another 30 seconds to close what you were saying.
No, I think I'll just say one line, which is that, I think it's an important area, and I think we should allow, we should enable, folks around us and from the outside as well to really come together and contribute. Yeah. But please take it away, Francis, and apologies again for my network.
No, don't worry. That's not your fault. So I'll try a very quick summary. We face a problem that no one can solve for themselves. If we continue the way we do in 20 years, we will probably have failed. So we need to do something different. And that starts with having a vision of the systemic vision that we would develop in a dialogue between industry and the regulators. All of these institutions need to identify champions, or champions must stand up and walk. And no one asked me to be the champion of LEI, for instance, at the ECB. I just saw a situation that was unbearable and I couldn't live with it. I had mirrors at home and I didn't want to throw them away, so I did something. So we need to engage. We need to attract bright people to the subject, but also we need to raise the attention of the top leaders to that subject, because sorry to say, but most of them are ignorant of the technical realities. They're too busy doing their business and their politics, short-term, siloed, also understanding them that that's their mandate, but there is no mandate yet written for, say, keeping us afloat in the digital age. So now that mandate, we need first to imagine it and then convince a number of people in higher positions that we need to move much more fundamentally. For instance, the interface between this globally integrated system and the fragmented regulatory landscape needs to be fixed. Thank you. I think we are coming to the end of our hour. It's too short. It would have needed a whole evening. So thank you very much, Colin. Thank you very much, Mukund and Verity for organizing. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot. See you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye now. Thanks, Francis.